Batman Forever, the video game on Super Nintendo, is most remembered as one of the worst games ever made, and maybe only the third worst Batman game in general, but that Super Nintendo game was ported to a lot of other consoles whose versions go unmentioned. I already reviewed the Sega Genesis version, which is a straight port with a few minuscule improvements, but the plague that is Batman Forever, the video game, also hit home computers, the Sega Game Gear, and the Game Boy, which is the version I'll be looking at today. Those rat bastards with PlayStations lucked out. Their version of Batman Forever was a port of the arcade game, which looks orders of magnitude better because it's a Ninja Turtle style beat 'em up. I see how it is! Rather than make new versions of the game for the Game Boy and etc., they just took the Super Nintendo game, hacked content out of it until it could fit onto a Game Boy cart, mangled the controls to work with fewer buttons, and otherwise the port is modified as little as possible. Look at these graphics! They tried to directly copy the Super Nintendo's graphics with half the bits and 3 shades of gray. Everything looks pixelated to hell and back. I'd call a claim lazy, but there's a lot of janky, inbred-looking puke on old consoles due to porting to and from the Game Boy. Those all-time classic Aladdin and Lion King Super Nintendo games were ported directly from the Super Nintendo to the Game Boy, and then from the Game Boy to the NES, leading to games so literally half-assed that the licensed NES Lion King cuts off before the adult Simba levels. Meanwhile, the unlicensed version has Simba hanging himself on the Game Over screen. I bought all the classic Game Boy Star Wars games to review when The Last Jedi came out, only to scrap the idea because all of them except Yoda stories are insanely difficult. Empire is an even less playable port of the NES game. I just keep falling until I hit a bit and die. The frame rate drops to PowerPoint levels the first time you encounter any enemies. It feels like this damn thing barely runs. And the Game Boy's Return of the Jedi is the Super Nintendo game, badly downscaled, running like crap with stiff-ass controls, especially for platforming over bottomless pits, and weapons that never seem to do anything to the damn enemies, even if you somehow get them to hit. Yoda Stories is a respectable port of a great game. The controls are just somehow too stiff and too slippery at the same time. But stop getting me off topic. We're here to discuss Batman Forever on the Game Boy. The first thing they cut from the main console versions is Robin. You can only play as Batman here, which is fine. Robin sucked anyway. They were so devoted to straight porting the Super Nintendo game that the Game Boy version has the same mission briefing screen, a big black thingamajig bat computer display with the actual briefing for the level slowly scrolling along the bottom. What purpose does this serve? There's no way this was easier to program than a white screen with a wall of text and a bat logo, which would have been way faster. You can still select 2 gadgets to equip before each level, but I have no freaking clue what these 3 icons off to the left that you can't select mean. The Game Boy version cuts out a full half of the levels from the main game, and then each level they kept in is split into 2 stages so they can still claim 8 levels. So we skip Arkham Asylum, and the first level is the bank robbery where you're rescuing guards. The first problem with the game is that the controls feel insanely stiff. You can barely move when in combat, and I can barely jump. If you jump straight up, you can't move until you touch the ground, and I can barely get Batman to jump to either side. It's a massive pain in the ass both for platforming and trying to outmaneuver enemies. I feel like I have to force it every time I want to jump around, jump up, or get down. The combat animations and controls in general feel so slow and sluggish, the game just feels gross to play. You can tell there's a lag to all your attacks. You notice right away just from walking around that your movement speed drastically decreases when you get into combat, so I swear we have a Flight of the Falcon situation where the game can barely process what's happening on screen. The game does throw you a bone over the console versions. Outside of a few extremely rare spots, you only ever fight enemies one-on-one. Present evidence suggests they had to do that to keep the cart from catching fire. But trust me, they make you pay for dropping the number of enemies with another major change. All your gadgets run on ammo in the Game Boy version. On the off chance you figure out how one of the gadgets work, you get about 4 uses of it per level, and then it's gone. So my grand out to the Genesis game's combat, tossing Hadouken stun pellets everywhere, that's out. And even if you toss a gadget, odds are good it'll get dodged and then you've wasted your shot. The levels are short, so you don't have to go far to get resupplied, but it's still a big problem with a game this unbalanced. Speaking of, though, I have my old pal the stun pellet gadget equipped, and I'm mashing out the quarter circle kick combo that throws it. Nothing's happening, so what the hell? To get out of the first room, you have to figure out how to grapple up through the ceiling. So let's see. Select and up doesn't do anything. Start and B turns you into a vase. What the hell is that? B and up doesn't do anything. Ooh. Okay, the Game Boy version has a high jump move that you trigger by holding down and then pressing up. That is surprisingly intuitive and useful for a Batman Forever port. Except after you punch a few goons, you have to figure out how to drop back down. Well, I guess I'll start mashing every button with down until something... Huh. You drop down just by pressing down twice. That's insanely easy, and it didn't take 20 minutes of guesswork to figure it out. What kind of Twilight Zone is this? A Batman Forever game with halfway intelligent button mapping for basic navigation? Okay, I still can't figure out how any of the gadgets work, but this is still better than I was doing on the Genesis. The main issue with the game is the same fundamental problem as the Genesis version, the underlying concept. The fighting is balanced like Mortal Kombat. All the enemies are as fast as you, have the same general moveset as you, they all have projectiles, and even on the game's easy friggin' difficulty, it doesn't take that many hits to kill you. Each fight in the game is essentially a one-on-one Mortal Kombat fight, one that controls like utter shit and feels laggy, mind you. So the entire game is basically that survival mode that fighting games throw in that you try maybe once or twice just because it's there, and then you never touch it again. It's very difficult to predict or reliably dodge enemy attacks since nobody has any windup, and even if I figure out how the gadgets work, I don't get many uses out of them, so I have to go toe-to-toe with enemies and hope for the best. The controls are such garbage, it feels like my best bet is just to use kicks to try and keep them at range. I found a few techniques to make the combat more tolerable. You can roundhouse kick an enemy to the ground over and over, but after you do it a few times, they get too far away to kick again because you walk so damn slow. If you pin enemies against walls, you can uppercut them endlessly, and luckily the game's crappy animations make it easy to time leg sweeps to stun lock enemies, so once you knock an enemy down, they stay down. The trouble is just landing that first hit when enemies can abruptly block, jump, and roll all over creation with about double your reaction time. Sit still, you little bastard! Level 3 starts the circus, and this is where we run into a huge problem. The second room of the level has hatches in the ceiling covering the exits, so to proceed any further into the game, you have to figure out how the grappling hook works. Well, we all knew this reckoning was coming. Let's look at the controls. A kicks, B punches, up jumps, down ducks, start blocks, and select pauses. Everybody take your best guess as to how you fire the grappling hook.
I will now play a game of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! You have until the duel ends to lock in your answer. Time's up.
I mashed every combo I could think of and nothing worked until luckily I found it listed online. You ready? You fire the grappling hook diagonally by pressing down, then forward, then B. And you shoot it vertically by pressing forward, then down, then B. Oh, but that's not quite convoluted enough for this game. You have to release the control pad for just a split second between each input, because rolling your thumb directly over the buttons like a regular Mortal Kombat move, that's how you throw a batarang. These dumbasses mapped two different gadgets not just to the same button, but to the same button combination. If you don't get the timing on the button presses just right, if you don't instinctively know how to time the delays perfectly, the grappling hook doesn't work. And even knowing the general timing, it still fires less than half the time I try to use it. I just have to keep mashing the combo until finally it works on pure luck. Actually, the grappling hook acting up isn't even due to the pickiness of the controls, I don't think. The first time that I got to the circus levels, I actually got stuck because, for absolutely no discernible reason, the super jump stopped working. Simplest button combo in the game, a move I've done a crapload of times, it completely stopped working. Get up, you little beast. Get up! I'm pushing the right combo. Get up there. Get up there! Rise, motherfucker, rise! Say, who else has ever played a game where basic moves completely stop working because the game's coding is comprised of fail? What's worse is half the gadgets also require you to put split-second pauses when entering their inputs or else they don't fire. So now when I try to use gadgets and it doesn't work, I don't know if they're failing because I entered the controls slightly wrong, if they're failing because I'm out of ammo, or if they're failing because the game is bullshit. Actually, now I'm curious, what are the controls for the other gadgets? Let's see, homing batarang, hold B, then quarter circle from down to forward. Yeah, I couldn't get that to work once. Sonic pulse globe, press back, then down, then forward, then punch with breaks between each of the buttons. Barely got it to work once or twice. The roll is forward, forward kick, but the sticky goo is forward, forward, forward kick. I actually got both of these to work a fair number of times, but I swear the roll requires a split-second delay before you press kick or it doesn't work. In the thick of battle, it's tough getting the exact friggin' timing to do the roll, so it doesn't reliably work either. Flash pellet, forward down punch, shares input with the grappling hook, and I couldn't get it to work a single time. The last three gadgets, the bola, electric pellet, and force wall, I actually got to work a fair number of times, but in the middle of combat I pound out the combos, and they work maybe half the time if I'm lucky. Part of it's the general responsiveness of the controls, or lack thereof, but I think it also falls to how the game slows down when you're in combat. Even knowing how to do the game's moves, they barely friggin' work. The enemies will blitz you non-stop with rolls, ranged attacks, and leaping all over the place, but your controls are so stiff you can barely use any of these moves back at them. I can't rely on the gadgets, so I'm left to whatever cheap tricks I can find. I have to get through combat by hoping I can just kick the enemies to the ground enough times to kill them. One thing that's kinda funny is that if you use a bola to tie up a goon, their hands get bound over their crotches so it looks like you kicked them in the balls. I'm not entirely sure how you're supposed to use the force wall apart from just keeping an enemy away from you for a few seconds, which does nothing since you have to kill all the enemies to advance anyway in most of the stages. I'd assume you're supposed to use the force wall to pin enemies, but you can only throw it ahead of you, so then you have to jump over and finagle the controls to knock an enemy into it, and by the time you've done all that, it wears off. Gotta love how Batman has apparently replicated Green Lantern hard light construct technology, and he only uses it to make a wall the size of a door. The circus level has some annoying ass quirks to it. You eventually figure out that you have to look for switches that will eventually make ladders appear out of nowhere and with no prompting, and at one point you just have to guess which one of any given set of platforms you're allowed to jump or grapple through. And then the second circus stage is timed with platforming controls that randomly fail on you and enemies that can near constantly kick you off the platforms. Also, if you kick an enemy off a ledge, the game doesn't count them as dead. Either they respawn off screen, you have to jump after them, or you have to leave and come back to make them respawn so the level will advance. Level 4, the second half of the circus, is where I'll easily point to as when the game gets hard. The AI gets kicked up a notch and it starts whooping my ass. They jump, cartwheel, block lots of shit, and combat roll like crazy, so you take hits with maybe a split second to react, and they're way more eager to use projectiles than they were before. The clowns have goop that prevents you from moving, or punching even though only your feet are stuck, and Two-Face's chainsaw goons fire projectiles. How does a chainsaw fire lasers? How? So I die. Of course. Took a little longer than I thought, but I died. 6 lives, no continues, have to start the game over. Luckily, the game has cheat codes like its big brothers, level skip, unlimited health, and infinite ammo for those gadgets I can't use. I only used the level skip. The circus levels actually end with kind of a neat touch. Robin comes out to disarm the bomb like in the movie. It's the only time Robin shows up the entire game until the last level. If you can even call that pixelated smudge Robin. The next 2 levels are chasing Two-Face through the subway. The pre-level briefing kinda makes me laugh. The high society launch of Edward Nygma's new box makes it sound like Gotham's richest are celebrating a cardboard box, Solid Snake style. They cut to the subway level. Ah! My eyes! My eyes! This level is so butt ugly! Looks like a badly glitching NES game that wants to crash but can't will itself to let go. Just why? You have to keep half the game's levels. Why pick the subway? It's the same damn level again, fighting the same damn enemies. The only difference is sometimes electricity comes down the rails and tries to hit you, and it's harder to avoid because the controls are so sluggish. And I swear the first 4 rooms of level 6 are direct copy-paste of the rooms in level 5. Just straight up recycle almost an entire level. Literally the only reason I'm getting through this game is the level skipping cheat. I seem to go maybe 2 levels at a time before I'm completely out of lives. It was around this point that I started experimenting with a new method of fighting enemies to try and land hits while dodging at least some incoming attacks. I started leaping over enemies, turning in midair, and landing a flying kick to knock them to the ground. Now behold the aerial poetry of Batman the Leaper. And now behold the breakdancing of Batman the Sweeper. It's the most effective means I've found of attacking enemies if you can't get them stun locked, but I'm still taking a ton of hits off of it. It only takes one guy to get lucky to suck out one of your lives, especially since enemies can and will air juggle you with the rolling attack, among others. The only long plays I could find of this game progress through the combat by using the gadgets to repeatedly immobilize enemies or keep them at bay. The long player that I found really liked the homing batarang. Great plan! does me no good! At the end of the subway, you fight Two-Face. I guess because he's a boss, he's immune to the leg sweep stun lock. You know, the bosses don't seem to take any more damage to put down than the regular enemies do. The last two levels are Riddler's hideout, literally the first time the Riddler's been mentioned in the story. It's the exact same fights with the exact same recycled enemies you've been fighting since the first level, only now there's a lot more annoying grappling over spread out platforms taking down enemies until doors just decide to open for you. Plus floors that break away into spiked pits that enemies will then push you into, but if you push the enemies in it doesn't kill them. A few rooms where Riddler's holographic machines actually make the game run even slower. Hard to believe, I know. And the strobing question mark room from the main game looks like it's been filled with cheap pencil sketches. Throughout these last levels, you fight the Riddler via holograms 6 frickin' times. He's got some really cheap stun attacks that immobilize you while he lands another attack, so even if you got here without the level skipping code, you're kinda hosed. And the final boss is not the hulked out Titan Riddler from the main game, it's just Riddler fighting you, and he spawns another 3 holograms that you have to fight. Because why not recycle enemies one last time before the end? As cheap and annoying as it is, it fits the movie pretty well that Riddler is a weenie that has to use technology to fight Batman. And faithfulness to the movie again. Robin does nothing but get captured. The game also has an actual ending, unlike the Genesis version. A scroll of text. Well done, Riddler's in Arkham, Two-Face is defeated, and Gotham is safe. Batman forever! I love that they tried to turn the title into a corny cheer. And then, rather hilariously, they have credits for the digitized actors who provided the sprites for the game, because apparently they needed to call out which people served as the templates for these tiny pixelated splotches with barely distinguishable features. And then the credits slowly roll along that one row at the bottom of the screen. Seriously, for crap's sake, blank white screen with a text scroll, how hard is that to program? It occurred to me after the credits rolled that cheating through the game, constantly skipping right back to wherever I died, isn't a great way to review a video game. I had to go back and try to play the game legitimately. So taking all of my knowledge, all of my practice, and all of my cumulative skill and exploits having played through the final levels, I started the game back from the beginning with no cheat codes, and I almost got to the end of level 5. I finished the bank without dying and then started hemorrhaging lives in level 4 when the AI ramps up. On top of how the game's difficulty increases, I could feel myself getting bored and complacent due to how dull, repetitive, and sluggish the game is. I couldn't hold my folk. But even if I'd kept myself perfectly folked the entire time that I played, I don't see myself getting past the subway. I couldn't get any of the gadgets to work reliably, and without gadgets to give you an edge, you're at the mercy of sluggish, stiff controls and enemies vastly faster than you are. There is some ancient, forgotten mystic art to playing this game, but I don't know what it is, nor do I care to learn. Because it sucks. And the game barely works. I read that Batman Forever is often held up as the worst handheld Batman game ever made. I haven't done the adequate research to state that with certainty, but if there's a worse Batman handheld, I'd hate to see it. The combat is horrifically unbalanced, the gadgets barely work even if you look up how to use them, the graphics are butt ugly, but the controls are so damn stiff, so difficult to get the game to follow your directions that it makes the act of playing the game a horrendous, painful chore. The main console releases of the game suck, make no mistake, but at least they're better than this.